who claimed to be stalked by a sinister figure dressed in white. As I approached the house, I noticed that everything was silent. I called the farmer by name, but no sound came from inside the house, only the wind was blowing, making the dry branches sway. It was then that I found his cell phone thrown on the floor, the screen broken and with a single photo open. In the image, I saw something that made me freeze. A tall figure, dressed in white, standing at the edge of the property, almost camouflaging himself with the night fog. The face was indistinct, almost blurred, as if the camera itself had difficulty capturing it. That figure seemed to stare at me, even through the photo, with an uncomfortable, unsettling presence. I looked around, looking for signs of the farmer or the stalker, but the night was empty and silent. I picked up my cell phone and tried to ignore the growing discomfort. I tried to radio and ask for backup, but the signal was strange, distorted, and my voice echoed strangely. I continued to search around the farm with the flashlight in hand, but I didn't find any sign of the farmer or anything unusual. But the place felt heavy, as if there was an invisible presence, something that watched me with every step. I felt like I shouldn't be there, like I was crossing a dangerous line. I went to the edge of the property where the figure in the photo was positioned, but there was nothing but strange, irregular footprints on the ground, as if someone was dancing or staggering there. Each footprint felt heavier than the last, sinking into the earth. I stopped for a moment, trying to understand what was happening, when, next to me, a branch broke. I turned quickly, but only saw darkness. The feeling of being watched was becoming more and more intense. I decided to go back to the car to call for backup directly from the patrol car, but as I walked back, I heard footsteps behind me, slow and heavy, as if someone was following me. I quickened my pace, but the sound did not diminish. When I arrived at the car, I saw, through the reflection of the glass, a white figure behind me, motionless, a few meters away. When I turned to face her, she was gone. The idea that he was being watched at any moment was maddening. The next day, I returned to the police station with the farmer's cell phone. I told the boss what I had found and how the feeling of being watched never left my mind. He thought it was strange, but was convinced it was just an ordinary disappearance and instructed me to investigate further. I asked to check the local incident files, looking for any similar cases. As I looked through the records, I discovered something that added to my discomfort. Other strange disappearances had occurred in the area in recent years. These disappearances were always mysterious, involving people claiming to have seen a strange figure, usually at night, standing on the edge of their property. The reports described the watcher as a tall figure, always in white, and with an unsettling presence. But no one knew who or what he was. All of the victims had reported increasing fear before they disappeared. Some had even described a feeling of deep cold, as if death were approaching. Each of these cases, like the farmer's, ended with the victim missing and no sign of where he could be. I decided I needed to understand what was so disturbing about this figure and whether it was really connected to the disappearances. When reviewing the photo on the farmer's cell phone, I noticed something even stranger. The image seemed to have changed. The white figure was now closer, as if it had taken a few steps towards the camera. I showed the photo to some colleagues, but they laughed, saying it was just a trick of the light. But I knew what I had seen before, and that image seemed alive, pulsating. As I stared at the photo, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if the figure's eyes were staring at me, an invisible pressure that forced me to look away. I couldn't explain it, but I was sure that, somehow, that presence knew about me and I knew about it. The feeling that I was being dragged into an abyss made me leave the room and take a deep breath. The weight of that image was unbearable. I knew I needed to go back to the farm to investigate further, but a part of me was screaming at me to stay away. I decided not to tell anyone about my next move. I went home, but when I went to bed, the image of that white figure wouldn't leave my mind. She seemed to follow me even with my eyes closed, getting closer and closer, more and more clear. I knew that if I wanted to understand what was happening, I would have to return to the scene, alone, and confront whatever that presence was. And, deep down, something told me there would be no going back. That night, I went to the farm alone. The silence was thick, and the feeling of being watched had intensified. The weather was strange. Fog rose from the ground, covering everything with a cold mist. I was already familiar with the farm, but everything felt different, as if the land itself rejected my presence. I walked towards the place where the figure had been seen in the photo, and when I arrived, a terrible pressure came over me. The air grew colder, and the feeling of being followed was so intense that I constantly looked over my shoulder. Every step I took seemed to echo, and the sound was followed by another, heavier step that wasn't mine. I stopped walking, and suddenly the sound stopped. I tried to ignore the growing fear and kept walking, but more and more I felt like I was getting closer to something that couldn't be undone. My flashlight shook in my hands. I finally reached the edge of the property, where the white figure had been seen in the photo. The place was empty, but the silence became oppressive. Suddenly I felt a draft of cold air and heard a low whisper. Quickly turned around, and there she was, the white figure, motionless, a few meters away from me, his face covered in shadows. It was as if it were made of fog, but at the same time it was solid, real. I remained motionless, unable to breathe, as that presence approached. The figure seemed to float, its feet not touching the ground. I felt a supernatural cold envelop me, and my legs were shaking. I tried to speak, but no sound came out of my mouth. I knew that if I didn't run away at that moment, I would never get out of there. Gathering what little strength I had left, I turned and ran towards the exit of the farm, without looking back. My heart was beating so fast that I could barely hear my own footsteps. But as I ran, I heard the same heavy breathing following me. When I reached the car, that distorted smile made me lock the doors and speed away. Back at the police station, I tried to explain what had happened at the farm, but, as expected, no one believed me. My colleagues thought I was stressed, that the pressure of work had made me imagine things. However, I knew that what I had seen was real, and the image of the smiling figure, standing in the darkness, would not leave my head. I decided to investigate the farmer's cell phone again. When I opened the gallery, I realized that the photo I had seen before had changed once again. Now the figure was even closer, its face shrouded in shadow, but its smile was clear, sinister, as if it knew I was there, watching. With each detail I studied, the more I realized that that thing was moving in the photo, getting closer to me. The idea made me sick. It was as if the figure was chasing me right through the image, trying to get closer and closer. But that wasn't all. In the surrounding shadow, I could see something new. There was a second figure in the photo behind the white figure. It appeared semi-transparent, and as I enlarged the image, I realized it was the farmer, his face distorted and pale. He was frozen in an expression of pure terror, eyes wide, as if he were screaming, but there was no sound. I tried to focus on the image of the farmer, but each time I did so, the image of the white figure seemed to become sharper, more defined, as if it were pressing to leave the screen. I turned off the cell phone. My heart was racing. That presence was alive, somehow, within that image. It didn't make sense, but the feeling was undeniable. I decided to get some sleep, but I soon regretted it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smile approaching, and the farmer's terrified face haunted me, as if begging me for help. I knew I was taking a risk, but I needed to go back to the farm and find out what was happening there once and for all. In the morning, with my mind still clouded by fear, I made the decision to face that mystery head-on. But this time, I took the farmer's cell phone and all the photos I found with me. One last check of the image left me in a panic. Now the white figure was facing forward, as if he were looking directly at me, and the farmer seemed to be closer too, still wrapped in an expression of terror, like if he tried to escape. When I arrived at the farm for the second time, the atmosphere was even stranger. The fog was thick, covering everything like a ghostly cloak. It seemed like a supernatural barrier, as if protecting the place from prying eyes. With my cell phone in hand, I went straight to the point of the first appearance. I felt the air heavy around me, the cold biting my skin, as if something was draining all the life from the place. I turned on the flashlight, but its light seemed weak, swallowed by the fog. When looking at the cell phone, I noticed that the image had changed again. Now, the white figure was next to the farmer, but he looked even more disfigured, as if he was being sucked into the thing. With a shaking hand, I turned the phone away from me, as if I was afraid the figure might leave the screen. It was an irrational thought, but the fear was real. I looked at the location of the photo, hoping to see something, anything that would explain it to me. It was then that I saw the footprints, irregular and deep tracks, leading to a clearing behind the farm. The feeling that someone was watching me returned with full force, and, with my heart in my mouth, I followed the footprints to the clearing. When I arrived, I saw an old building, a barn that I hadn't noticed before. The roof was half fallen, and the half-open doors seemed to invite me in. I took a deep breath and walked towards the barn, feeling the weight of each step. Inside the barn, the air was even colder, and the smell of damp earth mixed with something stronger and more fetid. In the corner, I saw a tattered piece of white fabric hanging from a wooden beam. It was the same fabric as the figure in the photo. A shiver ran through me. I took out my cell phone and, with an uncontrollable tremor, took a photo of the piece of fabric. But when I checked the photo, I felt my blood run cold. The white figure was there, in the image closer than ever, the smile even more distorted. I stumbled out of the barn, unable to comprehend what was happening. That night, I made one last attempt to understand everything, analyzing every detail of the photo. It was then that I realized the worst. The smile seemed to have changed. Now, I saw my own eyes reflected in it, as if it were a macabre mirror. And somehow, that was just the beginning of something much, much worse. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. The image of the white figure, with the horrible, distorted smile, seemed to haunt me with every blink. The eyes, which I thought were the farmer's, now looked strangely like mine. It was as if the thing was trying to absorb me, pull me into it. I went to the bathroom, washing my face in an attempt to get rid of that vision, but the feeling that something was lurking inside me only increased. I decided to return to the farm the next day, determined to get it over with. The next morning, I returned to the farm with more preparation. Flashlights, cameras, and an audio recorder to capture anything that could explain the mystery. Upon arriving, I noticed that the silence was even thicker, and the air was freezing. The feeling of being watched was more intense than ever. I walked slowly to the entrance of the barn, remembering the last time I was there, and the white fabric hanging there. Upon entering, I had the impression that the place was darker, as if the light itself was avoiding that space. I set up a camera in the corner of the barn, pointing at the piece of fabric. I turned on the recorder and began walking around the space, hoping to hear or see anything that would give me an answer. The silence was almost deafening, and every minute I felt my breathing getting heavier. That's when I heard a subtle sound, like a whisper, coming from somewhere behind me. I quickly turned the flashlight, but there was no one. The whisper continued, now closer, as if it were speaking directly into my ear. "His place is mine now," the voice murmured, low and distorted. I swallowed hard, and a chill ran through my body. I ran to grab the recorder, eager to see if the sound had been captured. But as I rewinded the recording, all I heard was the sound of my own racing heart and laughter. A low, cold laugh that seemed to come from inside the recorder. Trembling, I pocketed the device and hurried out of. The white figure was now facing away, walking towards the barn. But in the background, I could see something else. The farmer, his face twisted and disfigured, as if fused to the structure of the barn itself. The feeling that I would be next became unbearable. At home, I felt temporary relief, but the presence I had felt at the farm seemed to have followed me. With every shadow, with every reflection, I felt that empty gaze upon me, the distorted smile hidden in the dark. I went to the bathroom to wash my face, trying to get rid of that feeling. But when I looked up, what I saw in the mirror made me scream. A ghostly white handprint was imprinted on the glass, as if someone had pressed their hand to the other side. I turned away from the mirror, trembling. The farmer's cell phone, which I had left in the living room, started ringing. The sound echoed through the house amidst the suffocating silence. I walked over to it, picking it up with shaking hands, and saw that a new message had arrived. It was an image. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a photo of me, taken from some point ago, as I looked in the mirror. In the reflection, next to me, was the white figure, its hideous smile staring back at me. I started to question reality. How had that photo been taken? How was that thing in my house? I was being hunted, and it wasn't going to stop. Desperate, I tried to delete the photo, but it wouldn't disappear. Each time he tried, the image seemed to become clearer, as if it were gaining strength with each touch. I lost control and threw the cell phone against the wall, but it just fell to the floor intact, and the image was still there, pulsating, almost alive. That smile was now inside my mind, embedded like a scar. I decided to return to the farm for the last time, knowing that that presence had chosen me in some way. I needed to resolve this, or I would forever be consumed by fear. I prepared myself for whatever was necessary, even the worst. I felt like my sanity was at its limit, and that there was only one way to end this: confronting whatever was on that cursed farm. Upon arriving at the farm, absolute silence reigned, even more intense than before. I went straight to the barn, guided by instinct, but this time, I noticed something I had never noticed before. A small wooden door, hidden behind piles of hay, at the back of the barn. It seemed to lead to a cellar, and as I approached, I felt a draft of cold air rise up the dark stairs. I hesitated for a moment, but an invisible force pushed me, attracted me to that place. I went down the stairs with the flashlight in hand, and with each step, the air became heavier, more suffocating. When I reached the bottom, I found a small underground room, with stone walls and a strong smell of rot. In the center of the room, there was an antique wooden chair, facing a wall. Leaning against the chair was the same white fabric that the figure was wearing in the photo. My heart raced, and a feeling of dizziness enveloped me. I approached the chair, and when shining the flashlight on it, I saw something even more frightening. A mirror covered in dust with handprints, as if someone had struggled there, trapped on the other side of the glass. The marks were fresh, and one of them was larger, the other smaller, as if it belonged to a child. A shiver ran through my body. It was as if that place was a portal, a trap that consumed its victims. And then I heard the voice again, coming from the mirror. "You are next." I stepped back, trying to run, but something seemed to pull me back, holding me in place. That's when I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I looked in the reflection and saw the white figure behind me. The macabre smile curved in distorted joy. I tried to scream, but my voice felt caught in my throat. I realized I was trapped, and the mirror seemed to suck in my image. In a last-ditch effort, I closed my eyes, trying to resist the urge to be swallowed. When I opened my eyes, everything around me was in a strange fog. I was in the same room, but something was different. I felt paralyzed, as if time was frozen. I looked around and noticed that the mirror reflected the empty chair, but I couldn't see my own reflection. My heart pounded with terror as I realized that I was inside the mirror, trapped in the same trap as the farmer. On the other side of the glass, I saw the white figure, smiling. She watched me like a trophy, a new prisoner for her collection. With horror, I saw the white figure move towards the exit, taking the farmer's cell phone with it. I realized that she was taking over my identity, free to roam the outside world, while I remained trapped in that dark reflection. Over time, I began to see the shadows of others trapped, distant and formless, like echoes of people who had been absorbed into the mirror over the years. Their voices whispered around me, asking for help, but it was useless. I was now another trapped soul, at the mercy of that diabolical presence, which collected victims like trophies. Days, perhaps years passed, but time meant nothing there. All that was left was the memory of the outside world and the horror of knowing that, someday, someone else would come to the farm and meet the same fate. And then I too would be a shadow in the mirror, waiting for my chance to escape and replace the next unsuspecting person. And so we come to the end of this dark story. Or is we really coming? Because now, while you watch this video, be aware of you. These stories are not always on the screen. Sometimes they find a way of us follow to enter our minds. So if you hear a strange sound, If you notice an unexpected shadow or feel that invisible presence by your side, remember, it may just be your imagination, or maybe you have awakened something you shouldn't. If you have the courage, subscribe to the Portal of Horror to explore more dark mysteries. See you next time. Until there, and be careful what may be watching you.